My wife slept with her ex on my birthday. I got a video of it. Then my daughter said she hoped he was her dad, so I filed for divorce and cut them both out of my life. On my 38th birthday, I got a video message from an unknown number. One click, and my entire world shattered as I watched my wife, Evelyn, in our bed with a man I'd never seen before. But the real betrayal? That was still hours away, and it would involve our daughter. The air in my truck felt thick, suffocating. My hands trembled, the phone almost slipping, but my eyes were glued to the screen, watching a nightmare unfold in the familiar warmth of my own home. I recognized our cream-colored bedroom walls, the navy comforter Evelyn picked because she said it matched my eyes. And there she was, in our bed, with him. This wasn't some innocent mistake. This was deliberate, intimate, happening in the house I paid for while I was at work, building a bridge downtown. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, my hands shaking, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see it all. I needed to know exactly what kind of fool I'd been for 13 years. My name doesn't matter, but what I do might help you understand who I was before that night. I'm a civil engineer, specializing in structural bridge design. I've spent my career calculating load-bearing capacities, stress points, and failure thresholds. I built things that were supposed to last forever. I believed in foundations, in doing things the right way, and in trust. Evelyn was a middle school English teacher at Northwood Prep, one of those schools where parents pay extra for small classes and dedicated teachers. We met at a charity fundraiser. She wore a yellow sundress, laughed at my terrible jokes. 6 months later, I proposed on the same bridge where we'd had our first real conversation. Chloe came along 2 years after the wedding, and for a while, everything felt exactly as it was supposed to. We had the house in the suburbs with the good school district, date nights every other Friday, a daughter who made honor roll and played soccer. We had what everyone said they wanted. That morning, Evelyn had made me blueberry pancakes. Chloe gave me a card she'd made with colored pencils, the kind with the slightly misspelled "Happy Birthday, Dad, you're supposed to treasure forever." Evelyn kissed my cheek and promised my favorite pot roast for dinner. I remembered thinking how lucky I was as I drove to the construction site. I called my brother at lunch, told him life was good. Absolutely nothing felt wrong. The video was filmed with a hidden camera, one of those tiny wireless ones you can order online. Whoever sent it wanted me to see everything. The angle was perfect, capturing the entire bed. I watched my wife touch another man the way she used to touch me when we first got married and couldn't keep our hands off each other. I watched her smile at him, that same smile she'd given me over pancakes just hours earlier. The video was 11 minutes long. I watched every second. Not because I'm a masochist, but because I needed the anger. I needed the fuel for what I was about to do. When it ended, I sat in my truck in the grocery store parking lot for 20 minutes. I'd stopped to grab a bottle of wine for dinner, something nice to go with the pot roast, still sitting on the passenger seat. I thought about going home and confronting her, smashing things, asking why. Then I remembered something my dad told me when I was young and stupid and about to make a scene over a girl who cheated in college: anger is a coin you can only spend once. Make sure you buy something worth having. So, I didn't go home. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to see how deep this went. I pulled up my bank app and scrolled through our joint account. Evelyn had handled most household expenses, and I'd never questioned it. We were married. We were a team. But now, I saw everything differently. Cash withdrawals I didn't recognize, 300 here, 200 there, always on the same day of the week. Restaurant charges from places we'd never been. A hotel transaction from 2 months ago when she'd said she was at a teacher's conference. The pattern was right there, and I'd been too busy building other people's bridges to notice the cracks in my own foundation. I finally drove home around 11. The house was dark, save for the porch light Evelyn always left on. Through the kitchen window, I saw her loading the dishwasher, probably cleaning up from the birthday dinner I'd missed. Chloe was at the table doing homework. It looked so normal. So perfectly, completely normal. I sat in my truck and watched them like a stranger, these two people I'd built my entire life around. And I felt nothing. Not anger anymore, not sadness, just this cold, clear understanding that everything I thought I knew was a lie. I was about to get out when Chloe looked up from her homework. She said something to Evelyn, who nodded. Then my daughter walked out the back door, crossed the yard, and climbed into a car parked in the alley. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly who it was. The same man from the video. And what happened next changed everything. Chloe didn't just get in the car. She leaned over and hugged him. A real hug, the kind you give someone you know well, someone you're comfortable with, someone you trust. I watched her lips move, and even though I couldn't hear the words, I could read them perfectly. I wish you were my dad. 5 words. That's all it took. 5 words from my 12-year-old daughter. And suddenly, the betrayal wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about both of them. My wife hadn't just cheated. She'd replaced me. She'd introduced our daughter to her lover and let Chloe believe this stranger was better than her actual father. She'd poisoned my own child against me while I was out working 60-hour weeks to pay for her private school tuition. The car pulled away, and I watched the taillights disappear. Evelyn came out onto the back porch, looked around, then went back inside. She was smiling. I could see it even from where I sat. She looked happy, relieved, like she'd just finished some difficult task. I didn't go inside that night. I drove to a hotel near the construction site and sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled up the contact for David Miller, a divorce attorney my brother had used. It was almost midnight, but I sent an email anyway. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. I have video evidence of infidelity, and I need to move fast. Then I opened my photos and looked at pictures from Chloe's last birthday. Evelyn had her arm around our daughter, both smiling. I'd taken that photo. I'd been there. I'd been part of that moment. And now I wondered how many other moments I'd missed while being the good husband, the reliable provider, the man who did everything right. That night, I made a promise to myself. I was going to burn it all down. The marriage, the family, the perfect suburban life everyone envied. I was going to take everything she'd built with him and turn it to ash, and I was going to make sure she never saw it coming. David Miller had an office that smelled like old leather and expensive coffee. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't waste time on sympathy. I showed him the video at 8:30 the next morning. He watched it once, nodded, and said, "This is enough." Then he asked the question that started everything else, "Do you know who he is?" I didn't. Not yet. But I was about to find out. And what I discovered was so much worse than just some random affair. The detective I hired, Ben Carter, had the video analysis done in 48 hours. He used facial recognition software combined with social media cross-referencing. Turns out the man in my bed wasn't a stranger at all. His name was Julian Hayes, and he'd been Evelyn's first boyfriend back in high school. They'd dated for 2 years before she left for college. He was the guy she'd lost her virginity to, the one she'd cried over when they broke up. Her first love, she'd mentioned him maybe twice in 13 years of marriage like it was ancient history that didn't matter anymore. Except it clearly still mattered because 6 months ago Evelyn had gone to her 20th high school reunion. Apparently, they'd reconnected. Ben showed me the evidence in a coffee shop downtown. He had photos printed out in a manila folder like something from a crime show. There was Evelyn and Julian at a restaurant in the city, holding hands. Evelyn and Julian checking into a hotel on a Saturday afternoon when she told me she was shopping with her sister. Evelyn and Julian at a park, his arm around her. But the photos that made my blood run cold were the ones with Chloe. My daughter, eating ice cream with Julian. Chloe and Julian at a soccer field, him teaching her how to kick. Chloe sitting in Julian's living room, laughing at something on his TV. And in every single photo, she looked happy, comfortable, like she'd been doing this for months. "How long has my daughter been seeing him?" I asked. Ben checked his notes. "It started about 3 months ago." Evelyn had been bringing Chloe over to Julian's house every couple of weeks, usually on Saturday afternoons when I was working overtime on the bridge project. She told me she was taking Chloe to a friend's house, or the library, or some school activity. I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? I was working extra hours to save for Chloe's college fund. I was being the responsible father. And while I was doing that, my wife was introducing our daughter to her replacement dad. Ben had traced Julian's background, too. He owned a car dealership on the north side of town, one of those places that sells luxury imports. He'd been divorced for 5 years, no kids, no serious relationship since. According to his social media, he posted photos of expensive cars and golf trips and dinners at steakhouses. He looked successful, stable, probably told Evelyn everything she wanted to hear about how he'd never stop thinking about her, how she was the one who got away, how they could have the life they were supposed to have back in high school. The worst part was reading the text messages Ben had recovered from Evelyn's cloud backup. She'd been sloppy about security, using the same password for everything. The messages went back 5 months, and they weren't just about hooking up. They were about planning, about futures, about Chloe. One message from Evelyn said, "She asks about you all the time. She really likes you." Julian's response, "Good. We need her on board before we make this official." Another exchange was even more direct. Evelyn wrote, "He's been working late on that bridge project. Barely notices what's happening at home." And Julian replied, "Perfect. Gives us more time to prepare." They were talking about me like I was an obstacle to remove, not a person, not someone who'd spent 13 years building a life with her. I sat in that coffee shop, reading those messages until my hands started shaking. Ben asked if I was okay. I told him I needed copies of everything. Every photo, every message, every hotel receipt, every cash withdrawal. I needed ammunition, and he just handed me a nuclear arsenal. David had told me that divorce cases with this kind of evidence usually settled fast because the cheating spouse knew they couldn't win. But I didn't want a settlement. I wanted destruction. The first thing I did was change the locks on our house. I waited until Evelyn took Chloe to school on a Thursday morning, and I had a locksmith there within the hour. Then I went to the bank and moved half of everything in our joint accounts into a new one she couldn't access. It was perfectly legal, but it meant she couldn't drain our savings. I canceled our joint credit cards. I called our insurance company and removed her as a beneficiary. I did 13 years of financial untangling in about 6 hours, and it felt like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. David filed the divorce papers that afternoon. I specifically requested Evelyn be served at work. She taught 5th period English at 2:15, and I knew exactly when she'd be in her classroom with 25 students watching. The process server walked in at 2:30, asked if she was Evelyn Hartley, and handed her the envelope in front of everyone. One of Chloe's friends was in that class. I knew because I checked the school roster online. I wanted Evelyn to feel the same humiliation I'd felt watching that video. I wanted her to understand that her perfectly constructed double life was over. I didn't go home that day either. I checked into the same hotel and waited. My phone started ringing around 4. Evelyn called 16 times before I finally answered. Her voice was shaking when she said, "What the hell is this?" I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, "You know exactly what it is." Then I hung up. She called back immediately, but I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. She left 7 messages, each one more desperate than the last. First, confusion, then anger, then bargaining, then full panic. But I didn't care. I was done listening to her voice. Evelyn and Chloe showed up at the house around 6 that evening. I know because I'd installed security cameras the day before, the same kind of cameras that had recorded her betrayal. I watched on my phone as they tried the front door, then the back, then stood in the driveway looking confused. Chloe was crying. Evelyn was on her phone, probably trying to call me again. Then Evelyn did something that confirmed everything I'd suspected. She called Julian. I couldn't hear what she said, but I watched her pace back and forth in our driveway for 10 minutes while Chloe sat on the front steps. 20 minutes later, Julian's car pulled up. He got out, put his arm around Chloe, and the three of them stood there like a family. My family. Except I wasn't in it anymore. That night, Chloe sent me a text message. "Dad, why are you doing this? Mom is crying and we can't get into the house." I stared at that message for a long time before I responded. I wanted to explain everything. I wanted to tell her about the video, the lies, the months of betrayal. But she was 12 years old, and she'd already chosen her side. So, I wrote back, "Ask your mother." She didn't reply. The next morning, I sent copies of everything to Evelyn's school principal. The photos, the text messages, the hotel receipts, all of it. Northwood Prep had a morality clause in their employment contracts. Teachers were expected to uphold certain standards. Having an affair was bad enough, but the text messages where Evelyn talked about manipulating our daughter and planning her exit strategy while still married made it indefensible. The principal called me personally that afternoon. He didn't sound happy, but he said they'd be conducting an investigation. Evelyn's phone started ringing non-stop after that. I imagine her colleagues had questions. I imagine the parents had questions. I imagine her entire carefully maintained reputation was collapsing in real time. David called me that evening with an update. Evelyn had hired a lawyer, some guy named Thomas White, who specialized in defending the indefensible. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted to talk about settlement terms and custody arrangements and dividing assets fairly. David asked what I wanted to do, and I gave him an answer that surprised even him. I want full custody, the house, and I want her to admit fault in writing. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's aggressive." I told him I didn't care. I had the evidence. I had the moral high ground, and I had nothing left to lose. But that night, lying in my hotel room, I realized something that changed everything. Chloe wasn't going to choose me. She'd been spending months with Julian, building a relationship with him while I was absent. She literally said she wished he was her father. And even if I won custody in court, even if I forced her to live with me, she'd resent me for destroying her mother's life. She'd hate me for taking away the man she'd been taught to see as better than me. I couldn't win this battle. The only choice I had was whether to fight a war I'd already lost or walk away with whatever dignity I had left. So, I made a decision that night that most people would call unforgivable. I decided to let Chloe go, not because I didn't love her, but because forcing her to stay would destroy us both. And I texted Evelyn one final message: "You wanted him. Now he's all you've got." The divorce took 4 months to finalize, which David said was actually fast considering how much Evelyn's lawyer tried to fight it. Thomas White threw everything at the wall. He argued the video was obtained illegally. He claimed I was an absent father. He even tried to say Evelyn's relationship with Julian had started after our separation, which was laughable considering the timestamps on everything. But none of it mattered because the evidence was overwhelming. The judge took one look at the text messages where Evelyn discussed manipulating Chloe and planning her exit strategy, and his face said everything. Evelyn lost on every front except the one that mattered most to her. She got Chloe. The custody hearing was where everything fell apart in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. Chloe was old enough that the judge wanted to hear her preferences. She sat in that courtroom wearing the same soccer jersey Julian had bought her. And when the judge asked where she wanted to live, she didn't even hesitate. She said she wanted to stay with her mother. She said I was never home anyway. She said Julian understood her better than I ever did. And then she looked right at me and said, "He actually shows up." I watched my daughter testify against me like I was a stranger. And I realized Evelyn had won the only battle that actually mattered. She turned Chloe against me so completely that even a judge's order couldn't fix it. David pulled me aside after the hearing and said we could fight it. We could bring in therapists and argue parental alienation and drag this out for another year. But I was exhausted. I'd spent 4 months living in hotels, throwing myself into work, watching my entire life disintegrate. And I knew the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. Even if I won custody, Chloe would hate me for it. She'd spend every day resenting me for taking her away from Evelyn and Julian. She'd count down the days until she turned 18 and could leave. So, I made a decision that shocked everyone in that courtroom. I told David to withdraw my custody petition. I signed away my parental rights voluntarily. I agreed to pay child support but requested no visitation. The judge actually asked me twice if I understood what I was doing, and I said yes both times. Chloe wasn't my daughter anymore. She'd made that clear. And I wasn't going to spend the next 6 years fighting for someone who didn't want me. Evelyn's face when I signed those papers was something I'll never forget. She'd been expecting a war. She'd been prepared to fight me for years, to drag me through court after court, to make me suffer. But I'd just given her everything she wanted, and she didn't know how to react. There was no victory in it for her because I'd surrendered on my own terms. I walked out of that courthouse, and I didn't look back. The professional consequences for Evelyn came faster than anyone expected. Northwood Prep fired her 3 weeks after the divorce was filed. The investigation had turned up emails she'd sent from her school account to Julian, some of them explicit enough that the school's lawyer said they had no choice. She tried to fight it, threatened to sue for wrongful termination, but her union representative apparently took one look at the evidence and told her to walk away quietly. She ended up getting a job at a public school across town for about half her previous salary. I heard through mutual friends that she had to sell her car to make rent. Julian, it turned out, wasn't as generous as he'd seemed when playing the role of devoted boyfriend. Once the incident became public and messy, once there were legal bills and financial consequences, he started pulling back. They stayed together for about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Then he broke up with her over text message. Apparently, the reality of actually being with Evelyn full-time wasn't as exciting as sneaking around behind my back. I left town 2 months after the divorce was final. There was a job opportunity in Austin, a major infrastructure project that needed someone with my experience. I sold the house, packed everything I owned into a moving truck, and drove 12 hours west without telling anyone where I was going. I deleted my social media accounts. I changed my phone number. I cut ties with mutual friends who tried to stay neutral or, worse, suggested I should forgive Evelyn for Chloe's sake. I built a new life from scratch, and for the first time in over a year, I could breathe. Therapy helped more than I expected. I'd always thought therapy was for people who couldn't handle their problems. But my new company required it as part of their employee wellness program. My therapist, Dr. Emily Stone, didn't let me get away with pretending I was fine. She made me talk about Chloe. She made me admit that walking away from my daughter was the hardest thing I'd ever done. She made me understand that loving someone sometimes means letting them go, even when it destroys you. It took almost a year of weekly sessions before I could talk about that custody hearing without feeling like I was drowning. Work became my salvation. I threw myself into projects, worked 16-hour days, and earned a reputation as the guy who could solve impossible problems. I got promoted twice in 18 months. I started traveling for consulting gigs, designing bridges in cities I'd never heard of, meeting people who knew nothing about my past. I dated a little. Nothing serious, just dinner and conversation with women who didn't ask too many questions about why I didn't have kids. I learned to live with the empty space where my family used to be. 3 years after the divorce, I got a letter forwarded through David's office. It was from Chloe. She was 15 now, almost 16. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks. I'd pick it up, feel the weight of those pages, imagine what she'd written, but I never opened it because I knew what it would say. Sorry. Explanations. Second chances. And none of it would change what happened in that courtroom 3 years ago. Chloe had made her choice when she put on Julian's soccer jersey and told a judge I never showed up. She'd made her choice when she hugged him in that alley and wished he was her father. And I'd made mine when I signed away my rights rather than force her to live with someone she didn't want. So, I wrote "Return to sender" on the envelope and mailed it back to David's office with instructions not to forward anything else from her. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I met Sarah 6 months after I returned that letter. She was an architect working on the same project, divorced with no kids, and she understood what it meant to start over. We took things slow, dated for a year before moving in together, got engaged on a beach in Florida with nobody watching but the seagulls. She never pushed me to reconcile with Chloe. She never suggested that family was more important than self-preservation. She just loved me exactly as I was, damaged parts and all. We got married in a small ceremony with 10 people. And for the first time since my 38th birthday, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. People ask sometimes if I regret walking away from Chloe, if I wonder what she's doing now, if I ever think about reaching out. And the honest answer is yes, sometimes I do. But I also remember sitting in my truck watching my daughter hug another man and wish he was her father. I remember her testimony in that courtroom. I remember 3 years of silence before she decided she needed me again. And I know that some relationships aren't worth saving, even when they're supposed to be sacred. Evelyn wanted to replace me, and she succeeded. Chloe wanted a different father, and I gave her that freedom. They both got exactly what they asked for, and I got my life back. I'm not the same person I was before that video arrived. I'm harder now, more cautious, less trusting. But I'm also free. Free from the weight of people who didn't value me. Free from the obligation to fix things that others broke. Free to build something new with someone who actually wants to be there. And that's worth more than any bridge I've ever designed. You decide which relationships deserve your foundation and which ones you leave as ruins in your past. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?